Thank you. Other questions or comments? No. Yes.
Just to follow up on Mr. Wood's comments. Clearly we have problems here. Have you checked the records to determine what level of negotiations went on with Accenture? I mean, while we have all the problems in the world, you still have got a company that made a contract with the state of California, and it's almost 4 times the amount of the original contract. And again, being in the private sector, when we saw that if we were ever in a project and we saw that something was getting out of control and it might cost us double the money, let alone 4 times or 20% of the money, we would stop and go meet with the top management of the company and try to determine, what's happened to date, where we're going forward. And I'm wondering if you've got any evidence of that happening, or if it's too late for that to happen. I mean, I don't know. It's mind-boggling to me that a company like Accenture, unless what you said at the very top of this thing, that we failed to plan, staff, and manage this program, if that just gets Accenture off the hook, then I guess we're going down the right road. But I still think that there's plenty of problems right there with Accenture, and they ought to be called on the carpet as well.
Mr. Dodd, we would agree. In fact, the IT expert that we used to assist us in this audit, and the appendix are some of the significant issues that were identified by IPO and IVNV, the oversight individuals. He looked at that and he said there are certain issues in that list that are Accenture's responsibility. They certainly should not be off the hook. There are things that the state of California could hold them to as far as not performing under the contract. And that's one of the concerns we have is we have all these significant issues, not as the state of California, DCA is not making sure that things are getting corrected, but we also have to be able to hold Accenture accountable for, there's an expectation that you are going to do certain things in designing this system, and our oversight folks are identifying all kinds of issues and you're not correcting them. So I don't believe that Accenture should be off the hook. They should be held accountable as well. The concerns we had, again, with looking at the contract is there were certain provisions in a typical state contract that were, taken out of this particular contract that really weakened our position as a state to hold Accenture accountable and really required us to take on too much risk in our view.
Just to follow up, so I totally understand that. I get the fact that the contract was modified. It sounds like to me that prevents us from getting the keys or the code, as Chairwoman Bonilla pointed out. But what impact did that have on taking us from 28 million to 96 million?
Oh, again, I think the department and perhaps Caltech can explain some of that. And looking at, we have information in the audit report that shows that this went from 28 million, I think, to 56 to 70 to 96. It was an incremental increases, and they're called special project reports, where if the project is going to grow by a certain percentage, as my counsel indicated, you have to put this special project report together, which Caltech reviews and says, okay, yeah, we need to go ahead and approve this and move forward with additional funding and additional time for this particular contract or system to be developed or to be modified to work for the different entities. But again, I think I would have to defer to the departments to answer a portion of your question.
And they will have that opportunity shortly. Very good. I want to welcome Assembly Members Mullen and Eggman to the committee today. Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you. On the issue of the contracts, it's very common in the private sector when boilerplate language that is protective of an entity is proposed to be modified or removed from a contract, that there has to be a special system of review. Not just one person can make that determination, but it needs to be reviewed at other levels. Have you any evidence in your review, in your audit, that is the process, either at DCA or in any of the relevant bureaus and agencies? And if so, we're able to determine if that process was followed?
I don't know that there's a specific process. I mean, typically what we see when we're, as I was indicating earlier, when we're looking at projects like this or a contract that is significant, you're going to have your technical expertise and you're also going to have your legal, hopefully have your attorneys looking at the provisions and determining whether or not those provisions should be acceptable to the state or not. Now, we have access to all information any agency has. Our statute is very strong. With respect to a portion of your question, the administration asserted privilege, so I really can't get into specifics about any additional information that we had access to. They've asserted privilege over some of that.
So it's not generally the subject of privilege if you have a process for review, and it sounds like you weren't able to really identify that there is one.
Well, not a specific process. I mean, typically what you're seeing is when you're negotiating a contract, and again, the departments can hopefully expand on this, is you have your technical experts at the table and you have your attorneys at the table so that they're reviewing the contract. An attorney, as you know, is looking at something completely differently than a technical person, an information technology expert. So I think you would typically expect to see that as the process, but again, I'm limited in what I can discuss.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Very good. Mr. Jones.
I want to go back to Mr. Dodd's line of questioning and then also my earlier concern regarding Accenture. Have they done other projects for the state of California, and have they done other projects for other states?
I would have to defer to Caltech. I'm not sure. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not Accenture has done other work for
In fact, since
California.
Caltech is not scheduled to actually testify today, perhaps we could have him.
Sure.
Mr. Ramos,
I'm
if you could
happy to
introduce
answer
yourself,
that
please,
question
and then
any other.
answer the question, and then further questions that we may have for you.
Sure. I'm Carlos Ramos. I'm director of Caltech. Accenture has done a number of projects around the country and including here in California. Just off the top, they're the main contractor on Fiscal. They're the main contractor that delivered the PERS system. They are the main contractor on the leader replacement system, which is a welfare system for Los Angeles County. They're also the main contractor that delivered the California Health Benefit Exchange system that allowed for the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And there's probably several others that just escape me at the moment, but they have done contracts here in California.
In general, those other contracts, have they gone like this one's gone, or have they gone differently?
Well, yes and no. I mean, every single project, every one of those projects has had challenging issues throughout, and that's not atypical of technology initiatives. In the case of those particular ones that I mentioned, they did deliver. There were changes in cost, there were changes in schedule along the way. That's not atypical. Hopefully as I get a chance to talk about the process that's used, we'll talk about why some of that is the case, but they have, I guess what I would say is they have successfully delivered on those projects. Those projects, as many other projects, have been challenged along the way with changes in requirements, changes in schedule, changes in scope, changes in budget.
Was this project put out as an RFP, or and were there other bidders for this project?
It was put out as an RFP. I believe there was some initial interest by other bidders and even potentially some initial bids. When it came down to it, though, Accenture was a single qualified bidder at the end. So essentially, at the end, we had one bidder. It was Accenture. That actually goes into explaining some of the challenges that they had with the project contract back in 2010, 2011, when they were going through the procurement.
Okay, thank you.
And we can talk about it later, but
Sure.
some of
I just wanted
the
to get kind of a
challenges with the
nutshell
contract that
overview.
you have.
Chair Bonilla?
I just want to follow up on Assemblymember Baker's question about privilege. I just didn't feel we left that adequately answered because the auditor can't answer. So I would like to turn it over to DCA. And please explain to us, and because we actually really need to know this, what the process was. And please answer Assemblymember Baker's question and explain to us the role of privilege, and have you been forthcoming with the process and what your attorneys said?
And Director Kidani, did you have some opening comments, or just want to respond to questions today.
I do, but I would like to respond to that question, and if the committee wishes at a later time, I could go into my brief remarks.
After you answer the question, then we'll have
Absolutely.
your remarks, if there are no further questions to Ms. Howell.
So if I understand the question correctly, the role of privilege, advice that the department received from attorneys in the process and what that process was and how that shaped decisions, was that the question?
No. The question is, do you have a process for when you have protective language in the state, boilerplate language in contracts for reviewing
Yes.
at a higher level of management?
Yes.
And was that process followed?
Absolutely. We do have that process internally as well as with external stakeholders, Mr. Ramos and his department, as well as Department of Finance. We all have a vetting process that all distills into any SPR, most recently Special Project Report 3.1. So it's a very thorough vetting process that goes along with that.
So detail for me, if you could please, when language is proposed to be changed, this boilerplate protective language that protects the state in these contracts, exactly what that process entails.
The boilerplate language that you speak of, that was done through DGS, through the Department of Consumer Affairs, and went through the process. It was, at the time, Caltech was a different division under Department of General Services. I can't speak to the intricacies of that approval process and went into that. I could only speak to the different amendment processes, most recently the amendment that points to 3.1, what went into that, and the amount of oversight that was part of that.
It sounds like you're not familiar with the process, but if you aren't, how can you tell us that the process was followed?
I'm sorry if I was unclear. I am familiar with the process, but I cannot speak to what process was used to get the boilerplate language that was taken out in the original contract. I don't know what process was followed. I could only speak to the process that we used, the Department of Finance and Caltech, to get to where we are now.
So would we be able to find out from you exactly, A, what the process was, and B, who were the specific individuals who were part of the review of the language that was changed?
Yes.
I think a committee would benefit from that follow-up to identify again what steps were taken to review the language, who was involved. We're not looking for the legal advice because we can't get into a discussion about privilege there. We're looking at making sure you, A, had a process, who was involved in it, and how was it followed.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Ms. Baker. Ms. Howell, the issue of transitioning from DGS to Caltech was the same authority with DGS as today with Caltech in terms of monitoring, oversight, appeal, and actually terminating contracts?
So if I understand your question, Senator, does Caltech have the same authority that DGS had?
Or more authority.
Or more? I think it's my understanding they have the same authority, but, excuse me, but again, I would defer to Mr. Ramos, but it's our understanding that essentially that function transferred to Caltech. So in my view, and my understanding is they would have the same
They would have had the same authority when it was DGS, when this original contract was formed. And we'll ask Mr. Ramos in a minute. Now, Director Kidani, we'll ask you for some opening comments. But before we do now, perhaps we could go around the room and everyone could, around the table, introduce yourselves so that if questions do come up, we'll know who to address them to, please.
Helen Kirstein, Legislative Analyst's Office.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Joe Porcher, Staff Counsel with State Auditor's Office.
Thank you, Joe. And Director Ramos, you've already introduced yourself. And
Good morning, I'm Becky Stilling. I'm with the Department of Technology in the IT Project Oversight Division.
Good morning, Erica Lee with the Department of Finance.
Good morning, Brendan Murphy with the Department of Finance.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I would like to ask our head of our procurement division to come up and join us at the table.
very good. Perhaps.
I'm here.
Actually, Eric, would you mind sliding over a little bit? If you don't mind, I'd like her to sit over
All right,
here.
that would be fine. Thank you.
I'll ask her to introduce herself as well.
And then I understand you have some prepared comments, Mr. Ramos? If you'd like to, after Director Kidani, then we could go to your comments and then move forward. So further questions of Ms. Howell? Seeing none, we'll go to, yes, please.
Marnielle Voss, Deputy Director for Statewide Technology Procurements.
Very good. Thank you very much for being here. Sorry. Director.
Chairwoman, Mr. Chair, thank you. Let me first address this serious concern brought up by Madam Auditor. She's absolutely correct. There was a misunderstanding. The amendment in question, which the Auditor's Office had a draft as we were going through the process, we did not update the auditor after the amendment was executed. This amendment in question, which goes back to lessons learned, giving the boards in Release 1 additional maintenance hours, a better maintenance schedule, and from our view, allows us to hold the vendor accountable by us telling the vendor what we want and how soon we want it. That was executed in November and went through the very vetting process that I spoke of earlier, which was the department and its legal division, Caltech and its procurement division, Department of Finance. So all entities were involved in that. You know, I apologize to the auditor for that oversight, and that's exactly what it was.
Did you say that and I just want to be clear, I thought I heard and may not have, that the auditor had kind of a preliminary amendment?
The auditor's office had a preliminary document. It was not inclusive of everything, out of fairness. It was not inclusive of everything after the amendment was executed. So there was a document shared. The auditor, pursuant to statute, has rights to everything in the department, and my direction to staff was be as transparent and inclusive as possible throughout the process.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Please.
If I may?
Yes.
So as discussed, the committees have asked me to focus my remarks on Breeze today and address the issues identified in the background document. Before I do, I would like to provide the committees with some context. Breeze is a licensing and enforcement database that is designed to replace two separate decade-old databases and nearly 90 separate systems created by boards, bureaus, as workarounds for those two inadequate legacy systems. Its genesis was the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, commonly known as CPEI, which our Deputy Director for Enforcement will be discussing later. CPEI was the result of a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times that drew attention to poor enforcement cases, processing times. An updated database was one of 4 key areas that CPEI was designed to address in order to improve enforcement timelines for DCA's healing arts boards. Planning for the database began in 2009 and continued until funding was received for the project in 2010. Efforts to acquire the vendor began in 2010, and the contract was executed in 2011. The first release of Breeze went live in October of 2013. During development of the first release, it became apparent that there were major issues we had to address. The design work, as the auditor stated, for Release 1 was inadequate. The scheduled time for testing was inadequate, and the costs were going to significantly increase, perhaps by hundreds of millions of dollars, if changes to the contracts were not made. Many of the problems we identified were confirmed by the state auditor and its report on Breeze. By the time the audit was underway, we were already working on corrective action. That corrective action involved working closely with the Department of Technology to negotiate a new contract that would allow the state to better manage the project and control costs. This is consistent with the state auditor's recommendations. It is important to note that despite the issues with the first release, Breeze is operable and functioning. To date, more than 500,000 people have submitted applications and renewals online, and more than $137 million has been processed through the new system. If the committee wishes, I'll address the 6 issues that the committees wanted me to address in my testimony. The first of these issues has to do with the status of Breeze project given the delay of the Special Project Report, also known as SPR 3.1.